During the mid-80s to early 90s, a shift in rock and roll music began to take place. More and more, the synth-based new wave version of rock popularized in the 80s began to fade away, as a new kind of rock began to be formed. Popularized in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Washington. No, not that Washington. There. Grunge music began to really resonate with young people during this time. I have to give my brother, grunge expert Colin Marth, a lot of credit for helping me with this part, as he helped to explain pretty well how the grunge scene truly evolved over time. Grunge's primary asset was its raw, intense energy with angsty lyrics and tones, complete with emotionally driven melodies. The growing popularity of this movement led to the emergence of several Seattle-based grunge bands, with the Big Four, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. However, there is another grunge band originally based out of San Diego, California that managed to find its way into the mainstream. Despite not being one of the Big Four, its impact is on par with even those bands. This band's name is Stone Temple Pilots. While Stone Temple Pilots, or STP for short, managed to find their own direction and identity in a crowded grunge world, there were far more issues present in the lives of the band members, or more specifically, one of the band members, that ultimately led to their fall from the top of the rock world to a distant memory. This is the rise and fall of Stone Temple Pilots. There are two different stories of how Stone Temple Pilots founding members Scott Weiland, the vocalist and frontman, and Robert DeLeo, the bassist, originally met. The less likely of the two was at a Black Flag concert at Long Beach, California in 1985. The story goes that the two started talking about their girlfriends before realizing that they were dating the same woman. Oops. The two both broke things off with her and ended up becoming friends over the situation. The more likely story, told by Weiland himself, was that he and the friends in his band at the time went after DeLeo after seeing him perform. I personally want the first story to be true, but I figured I couldn't just pretend that it was a more likely scenario, unfortunately. After the band's then drummer David Allen left, DeLeo and Weiland got Eric Kretz, a drummer from Long Beach, to join the band. Guitarist Corey Hickok left the band in 1989, leading to Robert DeLeo suggesting his brother Dean as his replacement. The lineup of Scott Weiland on vocals, Robert DeLeo on bass, Dean DeLeo on guitar, and Eric Kretz on drums would become the lineup that made STP famous. However, Stone Temple Pilots was not originally Stone Temple Pilots. Before Dean DeLeo joined the band in 1989, they went by the name Swing. Dean hated the name and demanded they change it, so the band came up with a much better name. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to one of the greatest grunge bands of all time. Drum roll, please. Mighty Joe Young. Yeah, the original name the band came up with to replace Swing was Mighty Joe Young. Apparently, Mighty Joe Young is the name of a 1949 film that is essentially King Kong, but again, it was made by the same creative team, so they pretty much ripped off their own premise. Regardless, MJY recorded their first demo tape in 1990, much of the material being used on their eventual first studio album. They started work on their first studio album with record producer Brendan O'Brien, but they received news during the recording. A bluesman named Joseph Young Jr. had already claimed the name Mighty Joe Young. At least fit him, since his name was literally Joe Young. The band had to come up with their third name since Dean DeLeo joined the band. Inspired by the STP motor oil stickers, the band came up with some ideas for a name that could fit the STP initials. Dean suggested Stereo Temple Pirates, which would later evolve into the name we all know today, Stone Temple Pilots. As previously mentioned, the band got to work on their first studio album towards the beginning of 1992. Tom Carolyn, an executive at Atlantic Records, had interest in working with the band after seeing a show of theirs in Los Angeles. Brendan O'Brien began work as their producer. He had just come off mixing 10 by Pearl Jam and Blood Sugar Sex Magic by Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now that is inappropriate. Do better next time, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
That's disgusting!
The album took 3 weeks to record, a period that Dean DeLeo said was one of the best times of his life. That was some of my greatest memories of Scott. He was so on his game and he was so healthy. He was electric and vibrant. There was an innocence, yet a determination with all of us. When recordings for the album had finished, they chose the name Core based on the Adam and Eve story from the Bible. The album cover is Eve taking the apple from the Tree of Eden. The album was released on September 29th, 1992. It's kind of crazy how many things happened on this day in history. My favorite band, Rush, released their first live album, All the World's a Stage. Les Claypool was born.
We suck.
And most importantly, Blake Day, baby!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks! sucks!
Core was certified platinum for selling 1 million copies on June 9th, 1993. It has now gone platinum 8 times, meaning it's sold over 8 million records since release. They released 3 singles from the album: Sex Type Thing,
That's disgusting!
which they released on March 15th, 1993, Plush, released on August 23rd, 1993, and Creep, Not That Creep, these are 2 separate songs, released on November 1st, 1993. Critics didn't initially love Core, saying it sounded too similar to Pearl Jam. While you can argue this had some merit, with the band working with Brendan O'Brien, who had just gotten off of helping Pearl Jam produce 10, you would look kinda stupid if you argued this, I'm not gonna lie. I at least can only hear slight similarities, and as we all know, I am always right. The reception of the album at the time can be summarized by what happened in the January 1994 issue of the Rolling Stone, as readers labeled STP as the best and worst new band. Over time, though, Core has been near universally praised in retrospective looks. As for my quick thoughts on Core, this album is great. I'm gonna mention some standouts to me. I'll put them on screen. If they're in green, it means I've got something to say about them. If they're in blue, I mean, I got nothing, but go listen to them anyway. These standouts are Dead and Bloated, the opening track, Sex Type Thing, Wicked Garden, Creep, again, Not That Creep. These songs actually came out just a week apart, crazy enough, Plush, and Cracker Man. Plush has a famous acoustic version that the band performed for MTV. Sex Type Thing is the first STP song I learned on bass, and it, as well as Plush, are 2 of the very best songs the band ever produced. The rest of the songs on the album are all good as well. The band released Core Super Deluxe Edition for the album's 25th anniversary on September 29th, 2017. It includes a ton of cool bonuses, such as the MTV Unplugged recording, as well as another more traditional live concert from the Core tour. It also includes the original demos the band had recorded during the Mighty Joe Young days. This included demos for a song called Only Dying. This song was meant to be included on the soundtrack of the film The Crow. However, after the now famous accidental death of Brandon Lee on set, both the band and the film crew felt it best not to include the song Only Dying in the soundtrack. Ultimately, the band used a track from their following album, Big Empty, in the film instead. It also included a studio recording for a swing version of Sex Type Thing, as well as an acoustic recording of Plush and a new version of Creep with different vocals. The band did MTV Unplugged in 1993, as previously mentioned. They played songs from Core in acoustic form, as well as the debut of Big Empty, the song that would be used in The Crow. With all that said, Core remains perhaps the most influential album the band ever released. Now that the band had an established identity, it was time to keep this newfound momentum rolling. Stone Temple Pilots got back into the studio in spring of 1994. Less than a month later, the album had been recorded and mixed in its entirety. Drummer Eric Kretz said the album's development was quote-unquote streamlined compared to Core. Quote, "The reason was we were coming off a year and a half of touring for Core, so we took only a month off and then hopped in a Los Angeles studio, got in a room, and began working on songs and arrangements. Then we flew to Atlanta to cut the album with Brendan O'Brien almost immediately afterwards." I struggle to find anything about where the name Purple actually came from. I wish I had a better answer than IDK, lol, but truly I don't. Other than the guys just looking at the color and being like,
Purple is my favorite color!
The cover is a painting of a baby riding a dragon. Or sorry guys, a Keeling, a Hobjka miracle from Chinese mythology. So, a dragon. There's fairies over the 2 on a cloudy background with the album name written in a Chinese character, the only mention of the name anywhere on the packaging. The 3 singles released for the album were Big Empty on May 22nd, 1994, Vaseline on June 1st, and Interstate Love Song on September 9th. Purple was released on June 7th, 1994. Critics thought it was a step up from Core, and the album saw big sales, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard 200. To this day, the album has sold over 6 million copies, making it certified 6 times platinum. My standout songs on Purple are Vaseline, Loungefly, Interstate Love Song, Still Remains, Silver Gun Superman, and Big Empty. Interstate Love Song remains the most famous song STP ever released. It was a song the whole band knew had a chance to be something special, and they were right. For as incredible and nostalgic as that song is to me, I may like Still Remains even better. It's close, but I just love the melody on this song. I remember driving home with my dad from tennis practice one day a couple of years ago and us finding the line, "If you should die before me, ask if you could bring a friend." Very funny. Corey Taylor of Slipknot fame says he wishes he could have written a lyric like that. Big Empty is a song, well, I'll just show you grunge expert Colin Marth's text of what it's about.
Excuse me while I throw up.
But it also has these really cool sliding guitar parts, which I love. Honestly, I think Purple is the best and most consistent STP album. Like Core, it doesn't have any mediocre songs while having higher highs in my opinion. Purple was the first major step towards STP gaining their own identity. In 2019, STP released a 25th anniversary edition of Purple similar to that of Core. It includes a live concert from the Purple Tour, a studio recording of Interstate Love Song in acoustic form, Dancing Days, which is a cover of the Led Zeppelin song, which they had recorded as part of a Led Zeppelin tribute album back in 1995, and a ton of demos, including one for a previously unreleased cover of the song She Knows Me Too Well by the Beach Boys. I could probably talk about this album for another 20 minutes if I wanted to, but considering we're low on time as is, I think it's best to move on and talk about something a bit more serious. Scott Weiland began having severe drug issues around this time. He just could not stop using no matter how hard he tried, so he eventually gave up trying to quit. In 1995, he was arrested for possession of cocaine and heroin and ended up going to rehab. While on paper, rehab should have been a positive thing for Weiland, it ultimately did little to help his problem. This led to the first of many brief hiatuses for the band, but they got back together shortly after to begin recording. While Weiland was away, the other three members of STP formed a new band with singer Dave Coates. This led to a meeting between the DeLeo brothers and Weiland to decide which of their material would go on the next STP album and which would go on the Talk Show album, the name of their new band and the only release of the band's catalog. By fall of 1995, recording was underway for the material on the next STP album. The album cover is just a bunch of stuff thrown together. It has a woman in a swimsuit in front of a crocodile-infested pool, and then at the very last second, Scott Weiland wanted to throw in the altar in the background. I mean, it's fine, I guess, but I just gotta ask. What? This album would be called Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop. It was released on March 26, 1996, once again to critical praise, with some calling it their best album yet. The album got 3 singles: Big Bang Baby, released 3 days before the album's release on March 23rd, Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart on July 2nd, and Lady Picture Show on November 6th. Despite the critical success, it is easily the lowest selling of the first 3 albums, selling just over 2 million copies, being 2 times platinum. Tiny Music is a little different than the first 2 albums. It sort of mixes an alt-rock sound with the band's usual grunge. Scott Weiland sings at a higher tone than the first 2 albums, and lyrically, most of them are what Scott Weiland called, quote, David Bowie-esque, in the regard that they usually have a little meaning. In my opinion, Tiny Music is the most up-and-down STP album quality-wise. It has a few songs that I absolutely adore, can't get enough of, and then there's some that are pretty forgettable. I've got a lot of standouts on this one. Pops Love Suicide, Tumble in the Rough, Big Bang Baby, Lady Picture Show, And So I Know, Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart, Adhesive, and 7 Cage Tigers. Again, it is a lot, but the other songs are all fairly forgettable to me. Not bad, just nothing special. Big Bang Baby is a personal favorite, as well as And So I Know. Do not look up the meaning to Lady Picture Show on songfacts.com. Worst mistake of my life! This is one of my favorite songs of all time. For having such a dark subject matter, it's just so pleasant to listen to. And then there's Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart, a song literally about an acid trip Scott Weiland had. It has the best bass line of any STP song. This may be my favorite STP song overall, both due to how good it actually is, as well as the memories I have of it. I remember Good Times, summer 2016 in Florida, my favorite summer ever, which I heavily associate with this song, Big Bang Baby, Interstate Love Song, and a few Rush songs I like. Tiny Music's best moments are so great, and even the lows aren't bad, just somewhat forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Like the rest of the band's catalog, people have only continued to see the brilliance in Tiny Music. In 2021, the band released the 25th anniversary edition with a live concert from the Tiny Music tour, demos, altered mixings of songs, the long version of Press Play, which is the opening song, a beautiful acoustic song called Kretz's Acoustic Song, and instrumental versions of Ride the Cliché and Adhesive. This is probably the weakest of the 3 current 25th anniversary albums, but it's still well put together. Tiny Music is still considered a classic of the band and has only aged better and better over time, a rare feat for an album of its kind. Unfortunately, Scott Weiland's problems with drugs only continued. His aforementioned rehab ended up canceling some shows on the Tiny Music tour, and he never got clean even after this. In 1998, the band went on hiatus again. Weiland released a solo album called 12 Bar Blues that year. In June, though, he was again arrested for heroin possession. Weiland pleaded guilty to possession in February of 1999. Between the arrest and guilty plea, the band regrouped once again to work on their next album. During the production, just before the release of their new album, which they simply titled Number 4, Weiland overdosed on heroin. He survived, but for violating his probation, he got a 1-year jail sentence. though he only served 5 months because it was Scott freaking Weiland. You think they're gonna make him do a full sentence? I mean, come on, man. The band even had problems with the album cover. The cover is a 5-point star on a black background with the name on the bottom. The difficulty is that this cover is almost identical to an album by a band named Power Lloyd named Election Day, released a year earlier in 1998. A worker at MTV saw a pre-release cover of number 4 and let Power Lloyd know. When no one for STP would return Power Lloyd's calls, they filed a cease and desist against STP. STP's legal team made an offer that was apparently unacceptable to Power Lloyd, and then I couldn't find anything else. I have no idea why they were eventually allowed to use the cover. My guess is money talks, but who knows for sure. Number 4 had 3 promotional singles released: Down on April 5th, 1999, Heaven and Hot Rods on December 1st, 1999, and Sour Girl on April 16th, 2000. The record itself released on October 26th, 1999. Number 4 received generally mediocre to positive reviews, with some saying it was the most predictable and boring STP album to date, while others praised it and said it continued to innovate. While it took a while, the album was eventually certified platinum for selling 1 million copies by August of 2001. Number 4 is where you can start to see some decline in the band's work. It has a decent amount of pretty mediocre songs mixed in with a few really great ones. The standouts to me are Sour Girl, No Way Out, Glide, I Got You, and Atlanta. Sour Girl is one of my favorite STP songs. It has a interesting music video, to say the least, that features Michelle Gellar of Buffy the Vampire Slayer fame and is directed by David Slade of Twilight fame. Do I get bonus points for mentioning that? No? Okay. No Way Out is awesome, and for all of you wanting Scott Weiland to say the F word 15 times in one song, this is the one for you. Glide is a song that's a rearranged version of a song by the talk show band the other STP members briefly formed without Weiland. Atlanta is a ballad about Weiland's divorce with his first wife, Janina Castaneda. You can tell through the lyrics how hurt Weiland was by the experience. Number 4 is well produced, well played again, and yet it just isn't as good as the first 3 albums. It's hard to live up to 3 consecutive great albums to open up a band's career, but number 4 just can't hit those same heights. Still though, at its very best, it's capable of competing with even the very best the band has to offer. Stone Temple Pilots started work in a rented-out mansion in Malibu sometime in 2000 on their 5th studio album. The band and their families all lived in the mansion during this time, an experience Eric Kretz would call the happiest 5 weeks of my life. The album would end up becoming Shangri-La Dee, releasing on June 19th, 2001. 2 singles were released: Days of the Week on New Year's Day 2001, and Hollywood Bitch on September 3rd, 2001. The album alternates between hard and psychedelic pop rock, which netted it good reviews from critics but ultimately their lowest sales to date, failing to ever go platinum, only being certified gold for selling over 500,000 copies. Standouts on Shangri-La Dee are Hollywood Bitch, Wonderful, Black Again, Hello It's Late, Too Cool Queenie, Regeneration, and Long Way Home. Wonderful is a beautiful ballad to Weiland's second wife Mary Fosberg. It's just, well, wonderful and one of my favorite STP songs. The band performed the song a handful of times as a duet between Weiland and Linkin Park singer Chester Bennington, which is just incredible foreshadowing. Hello It's Late is another amazing love ballad by the band. The last one I'll talk about is Too Cool Queenie, which is a song about a woman who drives a man in a rock band to his suicide. For years, people suspected this, and eventually Scott Weiland confirmed that the song is about Courtney Love, wife of the late Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain. Although there's plenty of evidence that Love may have just killed Cobain herself, but no matter, I guess. They also subtly reference the lengthy legal battles Love had with Nirvana drummer and eventual Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl over the rights to Nirvana's songs, which she did, well, for money reasons. As brutal and incredible as these lyrics are on their own, the line, "It's okay, 'cause what goes around, comes around," is so unbelievably funny. I just love it. It shows the band had courage to attack whatever issue they wanted and truly not care about the consequences. Although I really like Shangri-La Dee, it still doesn't reach the heights of the first few albums outside of a few songs. Still, this one often gets overlooked due to how long it had been since STP had released Tiny Music. 5 years since what had been considered the last quote-unquote great STP album. But I beg to differ. I think Shangri-La Dee is great, and is closer in quality to the first 3 albums than you'd think. Despite the praise I just gave to Shangri-La Dee, it was a commercial disappointment, failing to reach even the sales of number 4. That, combined with low support from Atlantic Records, led to the band putting a hold on record production. Fascinatingly, they did record a song called All in the Suit That You Wear, which they pitched as a lead single to the first Spider-Man film in 2002. It wasn't selected though and would see release later on. Reports started to come out that the band would begin work on a 6th studio album. However, after an apparent falling out between Dean DeLeo and Scott Weiland, those rumors stopped. Atlantic Records released Thank You, a compilation album of songs from the band's first 5 albums, All in the Suit That You Wear, and the acoustic version of Plush from MTV Headbangers on November 11th, 2003. Just 5 days later, on November 16th, Dean and Robert DeLeo revealed what many had suspected: Stone Temple Pilots was done. The band officially broke up. This came as heartbreaking news for the fans of the band, but the writing was on the wall. Weiland's drug problems continued. Heck, you can tell just how much skinnier he had gotten during the Core Tour and the Shangri-La Dee tour when you put them side by side. The records became less profitable, critics didn't enjoy them as much. Everything was there, and unsurprisingly, it came to fruition. Once the band broke up, Scott Weiland joined Velvet Revolver, a superband with Slash, Matt Sorum, and Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, as well as Dave Kushner from Wasted Youth. Robert and Dean DeLeo formed their own supergroup called Army of Anyone with Richard Patrick from Filter and Ray Luzier, who now drums for the band Korn. Eric Kretz decided to keep a lower profile at this time. After Mary Fosberg, wife of Scott Weiland, asked Dean and Robert DeLeo to come over to perform a song at a beach party in 2007, the band members all reconciled. Weiland left Velvet Revolver while Army of Anyone had already gone on what would turn out to be a permanent hiatus. The original lineup all got back together for a reunion tour in 2008. The band began work on a 6th studio album in 2009. Production was finally completed in early 2010. Stone Temple Pilots released their 6th album, entitled Stone Temple Pilots. Yeah, they didn't give it a name. Oops. This was the first STP album released in 9 years. For reference, that was about the same amount of time between Core and Shangri-La Dee. The album appeared to not sell very well, as I could find very little on how it sold, which usually indicates lower sales. Critics seemed to enjoy the album, but a USA Today review from Jerry Shriver is how I'd perfectly describe this album. The songs were found to be quote-unquote pleasant, but also quote-unquote disposable and inoffensive. This is such a perfect description for this album. I don't hate STP 2010, but I don't find any of the songs particularly interesting. The best ones are Take a Load Off, Bagman, and Hickory Dichotomy, which is my favorite, though it's kinda like this, to be honest.
And the winner is Rocky!
My purebred, which cost me $1,700, lost to a rock.
It's all just so boring and corporate sounding to me. This is probably my least favorite STP album, because even the later albums have at least a few songs I really like, while this one doesn't really have any standouts. STP 2010 was nice to see as a return for the band, but it doesn't really leave much of an impression overall. Still though, STP was back and seemed happy to be back. The band even did their first ever concert film from a show in Chicago in 2010. Things seemed to be bright for the band, but as you might suspect based on how I'm building it up, this didn't last very long. The band had been planning a Core 20th anniversary box set and tour. However, this never happened, as the rest of the band believed Scott Weiland just wasn't capable of hitting high vocal parts on some of their songs. On a solo tour for one of his own records, Weiland performed these songs to prove a point. He figured they were all good, but this deeply angered the rest of the band. The band had to cancel a show in September of 2012 due to a doctor's order to Scott Weiland to rest his vocal cords for 48 hours. Weiland said in December that he was quote-unquote open to rejoining Velvet Revolver. With many rumors surrounding the relationship between the bandmates, Stone Temple Pilots officially announced on February 27, 2013 that they had fired Scott Weiland. Weiland and the other band members filed lawsuits against each other over the STP naming rights, which were ultimately awarded to Eric Kretz and the DeLeo brothers. STP wasn't dead, but the lineup everybody knew for all those years was. This time, unfortunately, there would never be another reunion. On December 3rd, 2015, while touring with his new band, The Wildabouts, Scott Weiland died from an overdose of alcohol, pills, and cocaine on his tour bus in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The music world was heartbroken, but maybe not shocked. Everyone knew of Weiland's long-standing drug problems, which had not subsided. STP put out a statement thanking Weiland for all he had done and called him, quote, gifted beyond words. The STP we had all known was officially over for good. But Eric Kretz and the DeLeo brothers remained. After they fired Weiland, they quickly got back to work. In performances on May 18th and 19th of 2013, STP performed with Linkin Park singer Chester Bennington. On that second day, May 19th, the band released a new song called Out of Time, where they officially introduced Bennington as a new member. Bennington said the band wouldn't record a full new album, but were working on a shorter EP or extended play. The band released a second single, Black Heart, on September 18, 2013, and on October 8, 2013, STP released their first EP, High Rise. It's only 16 minutes in length and just has 5 songs. Despite how short it is, these songs are, in my opinion, just so forgettable. I have nothing against Chester Bennington, I just don't like how his voice sounds on these songs in particular. I don't think he was a great fit for STP. It sold absolutely nothing, but critics did like it enough, though I have also noticed that critics nowadays seem to be a little more lenient than they used to. The band seemed to at least be having fun with Bennington, but it was all short-lived, as on November 9th, 2015, Bennington announced he was leaving STP to focus on Linkin Park, just a month before Scott Weiland's death that December. It was a peaceful departure, but there was little peace in Bennington's life. On July 20th, 2017, Bennington was found dead by hanging in his California home. He had struggled with substance abuse and depression and felt no other way to escape his demons. The band pressed on, and by February of 2016, they started a search for a new vocalist online. By October of 2017, STP found their new man and began recording new material. It was announced on November 14, 2017 that Jeff Gutt from Dry Cell, a little-known all-metal band that had disbanded in 2010, was picked to be the new singer. The next day, on November 15th, the band released their first single with Gutt, titled Meadow. On March 16, 2018, STP released their 7th studio album. It was their second self-titled album in a row after the 2010 STP album. Critics seem to like the 2018 album as a whole. My thoughts are that it's a step up from the last couple STP albums, but it definitely has some boring spots once again. My favorite songs on this are Meadow, Never Enough, and Reds and Blues. Never Enough is a really great song, definitely a highlight in the band's most recent work. Jeff Gutt is, in my opinion, a far better fit for the band than Chester Bennington ever was. What's immediately noticeable is how similar Jeff Gutt sings the original STP songs compared to Weiland. The main difference is in the power in his voice, as his is a little softer than Weiland's, but the tone is nearly identical. Soon after, the band started work on another album, an acoustic record. They released its single, Fare Thee Well, on December 2nd, 2019, and their 8th studio album, Perdita, was released on February 7th, 2020. I like this one a little less than the 2018 album, but I do like Fare Thee Well as well as the title track, Perdita. The song Miles Away reminds me of a sea shanty. I don't know if I'm crazy, but that's immediately what I've always heard. And You Found Yourself While Losing Your Heart is a great song vocally. As of May 2024, Perdita is the most recent STP album, though the band has continued touring and is currently on tour across the US. To wrap this whole thing up, when was it that STP rose and fell exactly? In my opinion, STP's rise started with Core and was officially complete with the release of Purple. Their peak continued through Tiny Music. The fall begins with the revelations of Scott Weiland's drug abuse issues, his arrest, the slightly troubled production on number 4, and the lower overall quality of it and Shangri-La Dee compared to the first 3 albums, though again, these aren't bad albums. Their fall was complete by their breakup in 2003, and although they did get back together in the late 2000s, they never really could get anywhere close to their prime years. As sad as it is to see one of the best rock bands ever ultimately come to an end, and even sadder to see the tragic deaths of Scott Weiland and Chester Bennington, I believe STP is currently in the best spot they've been in over 20 years. The band seems refreshed, Jeff Gutt has been a fantastic addition to the band, and overall, the sound of their music continues to live on. Stone Temple Pilots' legacy will echo on forever, and their influence still remains.